Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Alex Karp recently just did an interview for about 53 minutes with Andrew Ross Sorkin from CNBC, and he said a lot of interesting things. And one of the things he talked about that I thought was incredibly interesting was his relationship with Peter Thiel. Now, why is his relationship with Peter Thiel so controversial? Well, Peter Thiel is the co-founder of Palantir, along with Alex Karp. They both met in Stanford some 20 years ago. And the fundamental difference is an article on dailypalantir.com that's kind of covering what I'm talking about in this video, is that one of them on the right-hand side of the screen is on the right wing of the political spectrum. I didn't even know I did that, but that's actually, it makes a lot of sense now. Alex Karp on the left-hand side of the screen is on more so the left-hand side of the political spectrum. Alex Karp described himself as a progressive, almost has gone so far as saying he's a socialist. And you got Peter Thiel, who is hard right-wing libertarian. I mean, really believes in very limited to no government at all. Both of them have diametrically opposed political views. And one of the things that's interesting about Palantir, and that interviewers usually ask Alex Karp as like the public-facing person who speaks on Palantir and the growth of Palantir, is how do you get along? How do you build a company? How do you actually build a company from nothing to something in a world in which the two founders probably disagree on everything politically? And Alex Karp's response was really interesting. This is what he said as a quote. "I think that's a huge problem in our society. I'd like to hear what someone else thinks, and by the way, I kind of think I'm right. So if you have your argument, we can argue about it. I think a lot of my progressive friends have a little bit of an inferiority complex. If you're right, why do you care that you're having a dialogue with someone that's wrong? I like that. I have pretty strong opinions. Prove me wrong. I'd love to hear it." Now, I want to analyze a little bit of that quote for a second and sort of relate it back at the end of this video to what it means to Palantir as a company in general. Number one, this means something a lot in the context of just growing a company and becoming a more well-informed citizen in society. If you are progressive or if you are libertarian, whatever you may be on the political spectrum, you probably have beliefs that hopefully are strong enough to test your conviction so that your conviction doesn't move when someone challenges your beliefs. So, if your favorite color is blue and you genuinely believe your favorite color is blue, if someone comes up and says blue is a crappy color, red is a much better color, how do you feel when that happens? Do you get defensive? Do you feel insecure? Do you feel like that person is an idiot? They're ignorant. They don't understand anything? Or are you open to understanding why they think blue is a crappy color and why they think red is a fundamentally better color from whatever analysis they can provide you? I think Karp's argument here is that if you're willing to actually listen to the other side, it's not because you genuinely believe in what the other side is saying. It's not because you are so open to change your mind immediately based on them saying something. It's because you have conviction in your belief. And because the conviction in your belief is so strong, it means that you are then okay with someone disagreeing with your belief. And as a result of them disagreeing with your belief, you start to get open to a dialogue. And that dialogue is incredibly important because when you have differing perspectives trying to amalgamate some type of dialogue that is different than the status quo, meaning in the status quo you all agree, in a different version of the status quo you disagree. If you disagree, then there is a chance your mind can change. It's not that you actively want your mind to change because you have strong conviction in your beliefs, but it's that if your mind, or if you have the potential to have your mind change, you are more open to hearing what other people have to say. So Alex Karp and Peter Thiel for the past 20 years have had different political beliefs, but they've been able to build the company around Palantir, which is why I think the philosophy rooted within the company is so special and so important, primarily because a lot of their beliefs have to overlap in order for them to get to the best conclusion. It's like if you love blue, someone else loves red, but you guys both want to build a billion-dollar company, there are going to be key moments where you have to agree after intense, vigorous debating on the disagreements that you have. Because you cannot move forward if one of you is constantly saying blue, the other one's constantly saying red. There has to be some purple, right? Blue and red, when you mix them together, you get purple. There has to be some analysis, some agreement on purple. Palantir is a multi-billion-dollar company. One day, Palantir might become a very, very, very successful multi-hundred-billion-dollar company. And, maybe even in the future, that goes beyond that. We don't know what's going to happen with the company. We're going to see what happens over the next 20 years. But if it has the potential to become as big as it possibly can become, and it's already become pretty big over the past 20 years, it's because there was intense debating on things like technology, on things like data, on things like privacy, on the ethics of respecting civil liberties. And those intense debates led to fundamental conclusions in which there was agreement from both Peter and Karp as like the heads of this machine that they're ultimately trying to build. And that agreement then led to building Palantir for what it is today. So to me, I think the reason I wanted to cover this is because it was such an interesting part of the interview where Karp was just saying, like, I don't want to listen to you if you agree with me. Like, I want to be challenged. I want to have different political beliefs. And I think that's why he's gotten along with Peter. Because even though one, believes in more taxes and one believes in less taxes, They both can come to agreements around things that actually make the business better. Their political beliefs, their ideological beliefs are not so dogmatic to the point where their actual belief systems encroach on the capacity for them to meaningfully build something that is going to help society writ large, which is sort of what Palantir is trying to do. One of the reasons Karp and Thiel have been able to survive and thrive together is because they both have strong beliefs. And as a result of those strong beliefs, they aren't insecure. They can handle when someone else disagrees without having to cry or ruin an entire friendship because they simply aren't concerned about getting their feelings hurt from different opinions, which I think is also another important piece of analysis, that they aren't concerned about getting their feelings hurt or crying or like running away if they hear a different belief. They're actually really willing to be open to what that belief can do for Palantir. Now, I did a video on this a few months back that I'll link in the description, which was the paradoxical philosophy behind Palantir's leadership, Alex Karp and Peter Thiel. And the point of that video was to sort of highlight how different philosophies actually can come together to create a more meaningful, succinct relationship that takes something or nothing and turns it into something. And so the extent of the analysis kind of goes like this. Alex Karp believes that more government is theoretically good because you have a progressive, right? Progressives are for bigger governments, more generally. Peter Thiel believes less government is good. You want to have less government because less government means more human liberties, more civil liberties, more independence, more freedom, and that's more on the libertarian right-wing side of the sector. So where do those beliefs overlap in the context of Palantir? Well, what is Palantir doing? Palantir is a company that's heavily working with governments. Why are they heavily working with governments? A, because they're getting a lot of revenue from governments, but B, because they believe that the government has a role to protect people in society. And if the government has a role to protect people in society, the more efficient and more productive and less bureaucratic the government is in trying to protect those people in society is only going to make the government better, is only going to make the lives of people's better. Well, the government's not going to be able to do that. There's a reason you have NASA and SpaceX. You're going to have private companies that work with the government in order to reach those ideals. So that's more on the Alex Karp side, right? More government is good. Supplying more things to the government actually helping people is important. But then you have the Peter Thiel side, which is like, we should have less government in general because the government interferes in our lives. Well, if Palantir is working with the government, how does that embody the Peter Thiel aesthetic of right-wing sort of libertarian ideology? Well, what Palantir is doing and what their mission is rooted in is protecting civil liberties. Remember, they were created as a response to 9/11 to detect and use big data to find patterns to stop terrorist attacks. Well, if that's the case, you need to create a product that has the individual libertarianism, freedom, independence at the center of the core philosophy of your technology, so that when you're implementing that technology at scale in a vast, in an abundant organization, a very big place that is going to be using that software in hundreds of millions of use cases, which would be something like the government across the entire world, well, that government has to care about the individual. That government has to protect the individual. That government cannot overstep their boundaries in trying to protect the individual in the name of stopping a terrorist attack, because you cannot have civil liberties violated. You cannot spy on people just to stop a terrorist attack. This is not a utilitarian good. You have to be a bit more deontological here. You have to care about the individual and the respect for the individual to receive an end that is good for society writ large, which I think embodies the ethics of Peter Thiel, which is only, securely caring about the individual at the core of the philosophy. So you have someone on the left that's saying, hey, we should help the government. We should supply more things to the government. The government naturally is going to get bigger, right, if you do that. And then you have someone else on the right that says, if we do that, the individual has to be at the center of our analysis and of our discussion. And that's where I think the core overlap is. That's something they can both agree on. Peter Thiel's like, yeah, we do have to supply these tools to the government because the government is inevitable. We're not going to get rid of it. And then Karp is like, yeah, but if we're going to help the government, that does make sense that we have to care about the individual, because the individual, if it's not being cared about, then we are just having a tyrannical authoritarian force that is then allowing that is then imposing their will on people, because the individual is not at the center of the philosophy of the products we are creating in terms of the technology being implemented in the government. That's where I think the overlap is. Additionally, they don't work with Russia and China. Both of them can agree on that. They don't want to work with authoritarian regimes. So it's things like this that I think create such a unique philosophy around Palantir, because as Karp said in the recent interview, you can boil down a tech company to its founders. And it's very true. It doesn't mean the company is always going to be successful, but the founders and the ideologies and the philosophies of the founders impose themselves in a technology company, especially if they have the voting class shares. And Palantir has something called F class shares, which are founder-led shares, but they more so stand for FU shares, because they're allowed to do what they want. They call the shots. And if you boil down a tech company down to their founders, and their founders have certain philosophies, those founders mixing their philosophies together to lead to a product is what I think leads to the success of a product. And I think the overlap between Peter Thiel's libertarianism and Alex Karp's progressivism coming together is actually what leads to a pretty phenomenal product and phenomenal philosophy that hopefully can scale over time. Those are my thoughts. Let me know what you think about Alex Karp's analysis on why he's able to talk with Peter Thiel. I left the article about this in the description. Comes in a newsletter every single day, Monday through Friday. You can subscribe for free on dailypalantir.com. Thank you so much for listening. I will see you in the next one.